The media and entertainment industry began to fully embrace CGI at the dawn of the 90s. It was no longer only a field for pioneers, but proved to be a viable method to realize visual concepts, whether it be for short films, broadcast animation, or feature films. What these productions often had in common was their reliance on top-of-the-line commercial 3D software. Media and entertainment was a growing market for the developers of 3D packages, but one area that was still relatively unexplored in this regard was the gaming industry. .2D paint tools were still the norm when it came to drawing in-game artwork. Many of these tools were specifically catered toward the strict specifications of the consoles, taking into account their palettes and tile sizes. In the arcade market, however, there was a growing trend of moving away from the traditional 2D gameplay. Computing power was starting to reach a point where relatively affordable hardware could display a fair number of polygons per frame. Arcade powerhouses Namco and Sega were embracing 3D to provide cutting-edge experiences. The dynamic camera movements and shaded environments combined with the satisfying frame rates made them a major attraction. Despite their low polygonal look, the in-game landscapes and objects had already reached a degree of complexity. It was no longer viable to code these models by hand or develop in-house modeling tools. Commercial 3D software became the pivotal solution moving forward. Sega decided on the brand new package Softimage Creative Environment as their software of choice, one of the high-end solutions on the market, costing $30,000 per seat. It ran on silicon graphics hardware, specialized in catering to the demanding visual market. For Sega, the production of Virtua Racing marked the start of their long-term commitment to Softimage. Virtua Racing nicely tied in with the virtual reality hype of the early 90s. Many believed VR would have a major impact on everyday life within the near future. One obvious application for virtual reality was gaming. By wearing a stereoscopic headset, players would be transported to a virtual world. The 1991 arcade game Legend Quest offered a fully immersive dungeon-crawling experience. Players had to use their full body to slay the monsters and traverse through the dungeons. In the field of traditional 2D games, developers were taking their first steps in simulating a CGI look through traditional pixel art. Viewpoint for the Neo Geo was a title that relied on a polygon art style to simulate real-time 3D, and so make it seem visually more advanced. Sonic the Hedgehog similarly incorporated low polygonal design cues also created with 2D pixel art. When it came to developing the sequel, 3D software would actually be part of the production process. The artist used various packages on the Amiga and Mac to assist in the process of creating pixel art, particularly for objects with a 3D look. One major benefit in using these packages was being able to generate samples of 3D objects with the correct perspective and shading. These could serve as a template for the pixel art. The rotating barrel in Metropolis Zone was one of the objects for which this workflow proved useful. The 3D software helped them to animate this complex shape. But the biggest impact of 3D software was in the shaping of the special stages. The iconic roller coaster ride was created in a 3D application. Because cartridge space and the console video capabilities were still very limited, it required a lengthy process to turn the renders into usable game assets, drastically lowering their resolution and number of colors and cutting down the sequence into a few repeatable frames. The final result still made for a truly memorable and distinct visual ride. Sonic 2 demonstrated that the use of 3D software in the production pipeline proved useful in tackling visual challenges. Sylpheed for the Mega CD was a title that used 3D imagery on an even larger scale. The game relies on pre-made movie clips displayed on the background layer to make up the majority of the on-screen graphics. This allowed the developers to incorporate dynamic camera movements and display more complex 3D imagery than the system was actually capable of producing in real time. The method of incorporating CGI created and rendered on production PCs became known as pre-rendered graphics. In 1993, there were a number of games in production using this technique. Most of them were already showcasing more complex 3D geometry and lighting, the shoot-'em-up Nebulous Ray being one example, released by 3D frontrunner Namco. In 1993, Namco and Sega were also shaping the future of gaming with their new real-time 3D fighters and racers. Sega had greatly expanded their number of soft image seats, making it crucial in their pipeline for Virtua Fighter and Daytona USA. Softimage and its two competitors, Wavefront and Alias, were the three established companies with their own top-of-the-line package. Their software featured an intricate graphical interface and benefited from the performance of the Silicon graphics systems. This made them the solution of choice for the demanding CGI artists. Silicon Graphics had a range of systems on the market. At the lower end, there was the Indigo line of desktop workstations, costing roughly $25,000. These were the true workhorses for individual 3D artists within a production, and actually very fairly priced compared to the competition. Silicon Graphics systems had played their part in the CGI revolution, bringing high-end 3D graphics from computer labs to all kinds of creative studios. By 1993, the high-end packages were becoming fully equipped with a wide set of tools. They offered a host of modeling options, while the advanced ray-traced renderers were able to produce lifelike imagery. There were also massive advances in the area of animation. Use of inverse kinematics and bones revolutionized the process of character animation, particularly in combination with motion capture. Sega's Virtua Fighter 2 would make full use of motion capture to raise the bar for the animations. All of these features combined would make for a rather overwhelming toolset for artists, as it also crossed many disciplines. It was therefore not necessarily the limitations of the software, but the limited know-how of CGI in the video game industry that formed the biggest hurdle to overcome. It was the desktop tools like 3D Studio and Lightwave 3D that played an important role for up-and-coming 3D artists to wet their toes in this new world. For a fraction of the price, smaller studios were able to start experimenting with this art form. Although both packages lacked the advanced features and performance of the high-end software, they had quickly become quite versatile in their own right. The potential of 3D Studio was demonstrated by the developers of Rise of the Robots, a game that tied into the hype of versus fighting and CGI. Many hours of mastering the software and rendering the graphics led to a set of visuals that were quite sophisticated for the gaming industry. The pre-rendered graphics provided this 2D fighter with a cutting-edge art style. Despite the gameplay itself lacking any punch, Rise of the Robots got expansive coverage in the gaming press. It demonstrated the massive appeal of CGI in the mid-90s. CGI was an undeniable part of mainstream media by 1993. That year's highest-grossing movie, Jurassic Park, generated a ton of media coverage and buzz around this art form. In broadcast animation, the reliance on computer graphics had also been plentiful. The 90s was still an era with a general positive anticipation for the future and rising technology. Another trend tied to computer animation was the CD-ROM format. Pre-rendered computer animations were the perfect showcase for CD-ROM-based systems, making them appear to be more powerful than they actually were. Myst, Rebel Assault, and The Seventh Guest were big CD-ROM releases in 1993 to use pre-rendered graphics. A number of Western developers had begun to rely on packages like 3D Studio to set themselves apart, resulting in a massive expansion in pre-rendered backdrops and CGI cutscenes in the CD-ROM market. Another advancement to facilitate the use of these full-motion cutscenes were the new compression algorithms. MPEG-1 and CinePack were both introduced in the early 90s. They are lossy compression methods, meaning that the image quality could be severely impacted, but they were key in squeezing down the video to a point that it could be streamed directly from disk. Debabelizer was a prominently used application for video encoding, but it still required a considerable amount of skill and trial and error. Finding the best compression rate and using clever tricks to improve the image quality became an art in and of itself. It had only been a few short years since the first PC video tools had entered the market. It brought video editing into smaller studios outside the post-production market. Although, just relying on PC hardware also meant storage space and higher render times were complications that quickly arose. Digital video and the accompanying multimedia trend were certainly hot topics in '93. Sega jumped into this emerging market by opening a new studio in the US fully equipped to facilitate multimedia productions, spanning digital imaging in both 2D and 3D and a full recording studio. However, the days of the studio were short-lived, as was the hype around these multimedia-driven games. In this dynamic era, it was certainly a risk to invest in emerging technologies like VR and digital video or CGI. Likewise, staying at the sidelines could become equally problematic. The UK-based developer Rare was among the studios to take the risk to embrace CGI early on. The founding members became intrigued by the new 3D tools and their potential in using it for state-of-the-art graphics. They invested in a top-of-the-line Power Series SGI system and Alias Power Animator, ultimately attracting the interest of Nintendo and setting them on the path to developing a brand new outing of their beloved icon from the past, Donkey Kong. What had started with just 2 artists inside the company learning the ways of Alias Power Animator quickly became a full production, even stretching 2 projects: the Super Nintendo platformer Donkey Kong Country and the arcade fighter Killer Instinct. They were easily among the most ambitious video game projects at the time to feature pre-rendered graphics.
Yo, check this out!
The process of creating the graphics crossed a number of disciplines, from modeling and texturing to lighting and animation. New functions within the software, like bones, were imperative in the animation process, making it a lot easier to move limbs while retaining their link to other body parts. On Killer Instinct, they even used a motion capture solution to help realize the fighter's movements. Long render times had been the bane of CGI artists for years, and with 2 titles in production using complex geometry, Rare needed to take some serious measures. With Nintendo's backing, they were able to invest in a $1 million SGI Challenge XL render server. This allowed the 3D artists to send the more demanding render jobs to a dedicated render server. It was a true, full 3D pipeline that Rare built while these 2 games were being developed. Killer Instinct and Donkey Kong Country were both released in the autumn of 1994. A major achievement of the artists was to realize an organic quality through the use of digital tools. Levels felt like cohesive organic environments with their own atmosphere. It was a break from the general clean and mechanical look of pre-rendered graphics in gaming. Nintendo was able to massively benefit from the Donkey Kong Country series. They greatly boosted the sales of their console and extended its lifespan. Nintendo also used the games and production process in their marketing. Combined with their partnership with Silicon Graphics, this gave them a cutting-edge image. And on the other side, Alias was also using Donkey Kong Country in their advertisements. With the sudden shift from pixel paint tools to 3D packages came a search for artists with some knowledge in the field. For the pixel artist already working in the industry, it was a new set of tools to master and required an overall different mindset. By the mid-90s, these tools were quite overwhelming to someone new to the field. artists often had to learn on the go, consult colleagues, and struggle through the thick manuals. In the wake of Donkey Kong Country, the use of pre-rendered graphics had quickly spread across the industry. Numerous productions incorporated this technique, particularly where it concerned more traditional genres like 2D platformers. Despite the larger ROM cartridges available at this point, it still remained key to break background elements down into as few tiles as possible. Reducing the colors while still retaining the 3D rendered quality was one of the biggest challenges. Successfully editing the anti-aliasing to work against both bright and dark backgrounds was another point of attention. One major benefit of using 3D software was the ease of cranking out more animation frames and thus creating more fluid character movements. What remained, however, was the tedious process of successfully turning the renders into console-compatible artwork. All this extra work resulted in a more cutting-edge visual style in these final days of the 16-bit generation. The video game industry had quickly become a hot new market for 3D software companies. Developing cutting-edge games for the upcoming generation of consoles would make it mandatory to invest in 3D tools. The 3D software companies started to make deals with the console manufacturers. SGI and Alias already had strong ties to Nintendo. SGI even powered the graphical heart of Nintendo's new console. An adapted version of Alias Power Animator became one of the authorized graphics development packages. The once successful pioneering 3D software developer Wavefront partnered with Atari, making their package the authoring tool for the Atari Jaguar. Wavefront was also trying to tap into the larger gaming market with their rebranded package called GameWare. It catered to game development with the option to render to paletted files, polygon reduction functions, and the latest character animation tools. Alien Trilogy by Acclaim was one of the productions to be featured in the GameWare marketing, showcasing Acclaim's brand new motion capture studio. Sega's strong commitment to Softimage made it the official 3D development tool for the Saturn. Sega bought a substantial number of licenses and made it part of the official dev kit. Clockwork Knight was among the Saturn launch games being made with the help of Softimage. The platformer hit their local market around the same time as Donkey Kong Country and similarly incorporated pre-rendered graphics. In addition, Clockwork Knight also featured several pre-rendered cinematics. These were, in terms of their complexity, still way beyond the console's real-time capabilities. The majority of the Saturn launch games centered around real-time 3D gameplay. One of the major strengths of this generation of consoles was their ability to do real-time texture mapping as opposed to flat, shaded polygons. Textures were becoming key to providing the highly optimized 3D models with detail. The leading high-end 3D software packages on the market had a range of functions to help in this generation of real-time 3D, from optimizing models to the functionality of exporting to console-compatible data. Over in the PC market, 3D Studio was leading the pack. The huge library of third-party plugins made it simply unmatched. 3D Studio's network render was also a welcome feature to boost render performances, allowing users to distribute the rendering across all available PCs within the network. Heart of Darkness was a title that demonstrated that with great design and custom textures, the software was able to pack quite a punch. CGI continued to hit major milestones in the entertainment industry. Reboot, a fully computer-animated show, debuted in 1994. The following year, Pixar's Toy Story successfully demonstrated that computer animation was ready to deliver animated features. In the console market, it was a truly transitional era with the arrival of the next-gen systems. One game that embodied the zeitgeist perfectly was Wipeout, developed by the British studio Psygnosis. This stylistic racer demonstrated the real-time 3D capabilities of these systems. Similarly to most other productions for the PlayStation, 3D software was the central piece of kit in the pipeline. Psygnosis used Softimage to model the tracks and vehicles, in addition to in-house developed conversion tools for PlayStation compatibility. The game's futuristic races were accompanied with matching electronic dance music. Companies like Sony were marketing their new consoles to an older demographic. The clubbing young adults became a big target audience. The British collective, the Designers' Republic, infused the presentation of Wipeout with their brash graphical style. Wipeout was the perfect showcase of the contemporary trends in design and music. In this new generation, cinematics quickly became a staple element. Flashy, edited intros set the tone for games in all genres. They were also included to add a contemporary edge to traditional 2D releases. Although the cinematics added to the overall production cost, they were generally seen as a mentionable positive by the gaming press. They became mini-productions in their own right, sometimes separate from the rest of development, handled by a specialized crew able to use the full range of features of the software, from hair simulation and dynamics to particles. They also relied on various compositing packages in the post-production process, layering images together, adding various effects, and doing the visual fine-tuning. CGI also started to play an important role in advertisement. Computer-generated characters were front and center in all related print material. It made the games look cutting edge in the eye of marketeers, in contrast to using more traditional art. High-res models were therefore showcased on numerous covers by this point. And to further demonstrate the appeal of CGI, consumers were even willing to put down money for these types of images. Sega, for instance, released a series of discs containing high-quality renders of their Virtua Fighter characters. Alongside the 3D software developers successfully entering the gaming market, some big changes had occurred at a business level. Microsoft acquired Softimage in 1994. As a result, the package would be ported to Windows NT. Silicon Graphics strengthened their position with their acquisition of Alias and Wavefront, and so owning two of the high-end solutions within the market. In the PC market, 3D Studio further expanded their market share. The package would undergo a major overhaul in 1996 in the form of 3ds Max. With the heavy reliance on 3D software also came a shift in 2D graphics tools. Creating textures and doing all kinds of image manipulation demanded a different toolset. Photoshop had quickly become the standard in image manipulation, replacing the traditional pixel art tools in the gaming industry. In this age of CGI, a growing number of companies quickly started to adapt. Square, for instance, made the transition from pixel art to CGI at the end of the 16-bit generation. They had followed this revolution from the sidelines with great interest. Once aboard, they spent millions on hardware and software to become a frontrunner in the field. Square set up a big recruitment drive to attract CGI specialists, accompanied by internal seminars to get the other artists up to speed with the new tools. Their new CGI production pipeline helped to realize a more dark and mature visual tone for their flagship series, Final Fantasy. Alias was an important package for Square, but they also used Softimage in addition to a host of other post-production tools. But no matter which tools are used, the underlying design work is still key, an aspect the Square artists excelled at. Their attention to design also factored into the creation of their custom-made textures. Adding details like dirt and wear gave the 3D objects an aged and believable look. It was a huge improvement over the reliance on stock textures. The sophisticated lighting of the scenes further helped to set a truly immersive atmosphere in these computer-generated backdrops. The CGI tools were not a carte blanche anymore to create appealing visuals. It required true artistry to create work that resonated with the players. Although Final Fantasy VII was Square's first game to fully use their new workflow, they were already utilizing some of the finer production methods. For instance, using proxy animatics to block out the scenes in rough form before spending the time rendering the shots. Embracing movie-making skills like these in the production process became a growing necessity within this era of CGI. Square's sophisticated production process and expertise in design made Final Fantasy VII a new benchmark for CGI in the gaming industry. CGI had torn like a whirlwind through the video game industry. Within 3 years, there'd been a seismic shift in the production tools and methods. 3D packages had firmly been established in the production pipeline by 1995, whether it be for cinematics, in-game models, or even assisting in the creation of pixel art. Although it sadly marked the end of the era ruled by pixel art and hand-painted illustrations, a new, exciting age had emerged. This rapid shift brought major challenges for studios and artists, but also new opportunities to those willing to adapt. One thing had certainly become clear: the future was in 3D.